The Crossroads by A.R. Williams. Part 1. The Fall of the Brothers. The sun had set over the old neighborhood, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement and forgotten street corners where three men had once run wild. Marcus, Eli, and Caleb had been inseparable since childhood, their fates intertwined by the streets that raised them. The bond they shared was stronger than any family connection, built on years of loyalty, hustle, and survival. They had each other's backs, always. But that loyalty would soon be tested in a way none of them could have anticipated. Growing up, the trio had seen the world through a lens of survival. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and for them, that was enough. The streets had a way of shaping young minds, especially when you had no one to show you the way. The men they admired were hardened, ruthless figures, men who played by their own rules and got what they wanted by any means necessary. The only thing that mattered was loyalty, and the code they followed was simple: take care of business and never let anyone get in the way. When they were older, Marcus, Eli, and Caleb found themselves facing the ultimate test. They had planned a heist, a daring robbery that promised to set them free from their troubled lives. The plan seemed foolproof: get in, take the money, and disappear into the night. But things didn't go as expected. What was supposed to be a smooth operation turned into a chaotic nightmare. Caleb, unable to avoid the police, was caught in the crossfire, arrested, and charged for the crime they all committed. Marcus and Eli managed to escape, slipping away into the darkness as Caleb was dragged away in handcuffs. The months that followed were filled with guilt, but that guilt faded quickly. Marcus and Eli went back to their lives, continuing their hustle, living like the world owed them something. They buried their consciences beneath a mountain of distractions: money, power, and the belief that they were untouchable. The betrayal was easy to forget when they could drown it out with their success. The years passed, and though they occasionally thought of Caleb, they quickly pushed him from their minds. Meanwhile, Caleb's life in prison was anything but easy. The anger and regret weighed heavily on him as he sat in a cold cell, day after day, replaying the night of the robbery over and over. He was no stranger to suffering, but this was different. Caleb felt as if the world had turned its back on him, and worse, he had turned his back on himself. His friends had betrayed him, but worse still, he had betrayed himself. He wondered in the quiet of his cell if there was ever any hope for someone like him. In prison, Caleb found himself slipping deeper into despair, drowning in the consequences of his actions. He wasn't just paying for the robbery, he was paying for the years of mistakes, the lies, the hurt he had caused. He was paying for the life he had chosen, and as each day passed, it felt as though his soul was being consumed by the weight of his regrets. Transition to a moment of hope. But one evening, as Caleb sat in his prison cell, a man came to him. His name was David, an older inmate who had been serving a life sentence for a crime Caleb couldn't even imagine. Yet, despite his harsh sentence, David had a peace about him that Caleb couldn't ignore. They'd spoken before, but that night something was different. David spoke to him about a different kind of freedom, a freedom not found in escaping the law but in finding peace with God. "You're not just in here because of a crime, Caleb. You're in here because you're lost," David said, his voice steady and calm. "But there's a way out, a way to leave this all behind." Caleb laughed bitterly. "You think I can just get out of this, after everything I've done?" David smiled gently. "You can. But you have to let go of the past and trust in something greater than yourself." That night, Caleb couldn't shake the words. David had given him a Bible, and for the first time, Caleb opened it. It wasn't easy at first. His mind was clouded with doubt, resentment, and anger. But as he read, something inside him began to stir. The words spoke to him, reaching into the darkest corners of his heart and offering him something he had never known: forgiveness. Caleb's transformation. For the next several months, Caleb pored over the scriptures, his heart slowly being softened by the love and grace he found in Christ. He prayed in his cell, asking for forgiveness, and as he did, he felt the chains of anger, guilt, and shame slowly fall away. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt light. He knew that his release was coming soon. He had served his time, and though his future was uncertain, one thing was clear. He had been changed. The man who had walked into that prison was not the same man who was about to walk out. Caleb had been set free, not just from his prison, but from the chains of his past. But as the day of his release drew nearer, Caleb knew there was one thing he had to do. He had to find Marcus and Eli. They were still out there, still trapped in their old ways, and he couldn't rest until he had shared the truth with them, the truth that had set him free. As Caleb walked out of the prison gates, the air felt different. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders, but as he stepped into the unknown, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Marcus and Eli were still out there, and the life they had once shared would pull him in just as easily as it had the first time. The story ends with Caleb walking through the gates of freedom, but the pull of his past already tugging at him. He knew the choice he had made, but would his old friends make the same one? Part 2. The Road to Redemption. The Weight of Freedom. The clang of the prison gates echoed in Caleb's ears as he stepped into the world once again. The air outside felt different, fresher, but also sharper, colder. He had spent so many years behind bars, confined in a small cell, that now even the sunlight seemed foreign. Caleb stood for a moment, blinking against the brightness, before walking down the cracked concrete pathway leading to freedom. His steps were measured, his heart racing with anticipation and uncertainty. He had made it out, but it wasn't the world he remembered. Everything had changed. It wasn't just the new landscape, the new faces, or the unfamiliar noises. It was something deeper, something inside Caleb that had changed. The man who walked out of those prison gates was no longer the man who had entered. Caleb's thoughts turned to Marcus and Eli. They were still out there somewhere, probably living in the same old apartment complex, running the same schemes. He had spent years convincing himself that they had betrayed him, but now, as he stepped into his freedom, he realized that their betrayal was only part of the story. The real betrayal was the life they had all chosen, the life of crime, deception, and self-destruction. Caleb wasn't just trying to save his friends, he was trying to save them from the same fate he had almost sealed for himself. But how could he convince them to change? After all these years, would they even listen to him? A world of temptation. As Caleb made his way to the apartment complex, he passed the familiar places of his youth: the corner store where they used to buy cigarettes, the alley where they would hide out from the cops, the street corner where they'd sell anything they could get their hands on. It all felt so close, so tangible. The temptation to fall back into that life was powerful. He turned the corner and saw it, the old apartment complex. The building was the same, battered by time, the windows broken, the paint peeling off the walls. It had always been a place where people came to escape, but in reality, it was just a cage, just another prison that kept people locked in cycles of destruction. Caleb hesitated for a moment before walking through the entrance. He knew Marcus and Eli would be there. He knew their lives hadn't changed. But the question was, would Caleb's life be enough to change theirs? A reunion with Marcus and Eli. Marcus was standing outside, leaning against a rusted mailbox, talking with a couple of old acquaintances who were still involved in the underground world they had once ruled. Caleb approached, but Marcus didn't notice him at first. His back was turned, and Caleb had to take a deep breath before speaking. "Marcus!" Caleb called out. Marcus turned sharply, his eyes narrowing for a moment as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then a smile spread across his face, a knowing grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Caleb, is that really you, man?" Marcus stepped forward, giving Caleb a half-hearted hug. "I gotta say, you look different, cleaned up a bit. But hey, welcome back to the real world. We've been holding it down without you." Caleb's heart sank. Marcus hadn't changed at all. He was still the same, a man living by the rules of the street, indifferent to the higher calling Caleb had found. "I've changed, Marcus," Caleb said quietly. "I'm not the same man. I've found peace. I've found God." Marcus chuckled, a dismissive sound. "God? Man, you've been in there too long. You can't be serious. Look, you've been away, and I get it. You probably need some time to readjust, but we've got things to do. The game's still in motion." Eli appeared from behind Marcus, his face more guarded, his eyes searching Caleb's face. Unlike Marcus, Eli wasn't quick to dismiss him. There was something in Eli's eyes, doubt, confusion, or maybe something deeper. "You really think you've changed?" Eli asked, his voice low. "You think you can just come back here and live like the rest of us?" Caleb's chest tightened. The sting of their words was sharp, but he knew what he had to do. He couldn't back down now. The message he carried was too important. "I know I've changed," Caleb said firmly, his voice full of conviction. "I've found forgiveness, Eli, and I'm telling you, it's real. It's not just some story. It's not just some idea. I'm living proof that anyone can change." The temptation to return. The conversation didn't go as Caleb had hoped. Marcus and Eli were unmoved. Their eyes still held the hardness of men who had learned to survive, to trust no one, not even themselves. Caleb felt a wave of doubt hit him. Had he made the right choice? Could he really make a difference in their lives? That night, Caleb found himself standing on the same street corner where he had once sold stolen goods, where he had learned to mask his fear with bravado. The streetlights flickered above him as he watched the shadows of his past stretch out before him. The temptation was strong. Everything in him screamed to return to the life he had known. After all, it was the only life he understood. But Caleb had been set free. He wasn't that man anymore. He had a new purpose, a new mission. The thought of returning to his old life felt like a betrayal to the freedom he had found in Christ. He turned away from the corner, taking a deep breath as he walked back to his small apartment. He didn't know if Marcus or Eli would ever accept his faith, but he couldn't give up on them. Not yet. The unexpected test. The next day, Caleb received a message from an old contact, one of the men he had once worked with on the streets. The message was simple. "We've got a deal. Meet us at the warehouse. It's the same thing we used to do." Caleb stared at the phone for a long moment. The old life was calling him back, offering him a chance to slip back into the shadows. It would be easy. He knew how to play the game. He could get in, get the money, and disappear. No one would ever know. But deep down, he knew that it wasn't the answer. This wasn't the life God had planned for him. It wasn't the life of redemption and transformation that he was supposed to live. Caleb's heart raced as he dialed Marcus's number. The phone rang twice before Marcus picked up. "Yo, Caleb, what's up?" Marcus's voice was casual. "Marcus," Caleb said, his voice trembling slightly, "I need you to meet me. I'm at a crossroads. I need to know if you're ready to change too." The line went silent for a long time. Caleb could feel the weight of Marcus's hesitation on the other end of the phone. Then Marcus's voice came back, low and uncertain. "I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm ready to leave all that behind." As Caleb sat there, he realized that this wasn't just his battle anymore. Marcus and Eli were facing the same choice he had made years ago, the choice to walk away from the streets and into something new. But would they make the right choice? End of Part 2. Part 3. The Battle Within. The call to action. The silence on the other end of the phone line was deafening. Caleb felt his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He had hoped that Marcus would listen, that he would hear the urgency in Caleb's voice and finally make the choice to change. But instead, all he heard was the hesitation, the reluctance that Caleb knew all too well. Caleb looked down at his hands, remembering the nights he had spent hiding from the law, running from the choices he had made. He remembered the lies he'd told, the betrayal he'd caused, and the way he had lived, trapped in a prison of his own making. But he wasn't that man anymore. He couldn't go back. "I'm not asking you to change overnight, Marcus," Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm just asking you to take the first step. I've taken mine, and it's been the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm free, Marcus, and you can be too. You don't have to stay in this cycle. I won't let you." There was a long pause on the line, but finally Marcus's voice came back. "I hear you, man, but I don't know if I'm ready to leave it all behind. You know how this game works. It's all we know. All I know." The words stung, but Caleb knew this moment wasn't about winning an argument. It was about planting a seed. It was about showing Marcus and Eli that there was something better. "Just think about it," Caleb said softly. "I'll be here." As he ended the call, Caleb sat in the dim light of his apartment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had chosen his path. Now, he could only pray that Marcus and Eli would make the same choice. The temptation strikes. The next day, Caleb received an unexpected visitor. Jackson, an old associate from his past life. Jackson was one of the most dangerous men Caleb had known, and the memory of the countless jobs they had pulled together still haunted him. But this time, Jackson wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a way to pull Caleb back into the fold. "I heard you got out," Jackson said, sitting down across from Caleb in his small apartment. "And I've been hearing some crazy things. Word on the street is you found God, huh? That right?" Caleb looked at Jackson, his heart heavy with the memories of their past. This was the kind of temptation he had feared, the kind that always seemed to find a way to come back into his life. "It's true," Caleb said, his voice steady. "I've changed, Jackson. I don't want that life anymore." Jackson leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. "You really think you can just walk away from all this? You think that's how it works? You know what's waiting for you out there, Caleb. No one gets out clean." Caleb's fists clenched, but he stayed calm. "I don't care what's waiting for me. I know what I've found, and I won't let go of it. Not for anything." But Jackson wasn't done. "You know, I've got a deal lined up. Big one. It could set you up for life, Caleb. One more job. We can get out together. No more looking over our shoulders. No more being hunted. All we've got to do is take what's ours." Caleb's mind raced. This was the temptation he had fought against every day in prison. The call to return to the life that had almost destroyed him. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. The same thrill he used to chase, the same hunger for power and control. But then he remembered the peace he had found in Christ, the freedom that had set him apart from the darkness he had once lived in. "I'm not going back, Jackson," Caleb said, his voice low but full of conviction. "I've found a new way. You can't tempt me with the past anymore." Jackson stood, shaking his head. "You're making a big mistake, Caleb. You'll come crawling back. They always do." A new path, for Caleb, for Marcus, for Eli. As Jackson left, Caleb felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly replaced with doubt. The road ahead was far from clear. He had resisted Jackson's offer, but would Marcus and Eli? Would they stay on the path of destruction, or would they see the truth Caleb had found? He couldn't do it alone. He knew that now. He had to reach them. The next day, Caleb walked to Marcus and Eli's apartment, his heart heavy but resolute. As he entered the building, the old familiar smell of weed and alcohol hit him, a sharp reminder of the world he was trying to escape. But he walked up the stairs anyway, his hand shaking slightly as he knocked on the door. Eli answered, his eyes scanning Caleb for any sign of weakness. "What's up?" he asked, his voice distant. "I need to talk to you both," Caleb said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "I need to make you see something." You don't have to keep living this way. I'm here for you, but I can't do it if you won't listen." Marcus was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. He looked up as Caleb entered, a sneer crossing his face. "What's this about, man? You're starting to sound like some preacher or something. We don't need that crap." "I'm not a preacher, Marcus," Caleb said, his voice steady. "But I am here to tell you the truth. You're living a lie, both of you. You're chasing something that will never fill the emptiness inside. I know, because I was there. But you don't have to keep going down this road." Eli stood up, crossing his arms. "You think you're better than us now, huh? Just because you found Jesus, you think we can change?" "No," Caleb said, shaking his head. "I don't think I'm better. I'm just telling you that I've found freedom. And I want you to have that freedom too. But it's your choice." The twist: a life-altering decision. Just as Caleb finished speaking, the door burst open. Jackson stood there, a cold smile on his face, flanked by two men Caleb recognized from his past. Men who didn't care about the law or redemption, only about their own gain. "You're not going anywhere, Caleb," Jackson said, his voice a snake's hiss. "You've made your choice, but now I'm making mine, and you're coming with me." Caleb's heart raced as he saw the two men moving toward him. His mind flashed back to the many times he had been in similar situations, facing the consequences of his choices. But this time, something was different. This time he knew he had the power of God on his side. Without thinking, Caleb stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "No," he said, his voice calm yet full of authority. "I've chosen the Lord, and I'm not going back to that life." The men hesitated, unsure of how to respond to his defiance, but Caleb stood firm, his heart steady with the peace of God that surpassed all understanding. Jackson's face twisted with anger. "You think you're untouchable now? You'll regret this." With that, Jackson and his men left, leaving Caleb standing in the doorway, his heart pounding. As the door closed, Caleb turned to Marcus and Eli, his breath heavy with adrenaline. "That's the life you're being pulled back into," Caleb said, his voice filled with urgency. "It's a life of lies, violence, and death. But you don't have to choose it. You can walk away. I know it's hard, but I'm telling you, you can be free." Marcus and Eli stood there in silence, the weight of Caleb's words sinking in. Would they follow Caleb into the unknown, embracing the freedom he had found? Or would they turn their backs on him, and on the hope that was offered? End of Part 3. Part 4. The Ultimate Choice. The calm before the storm. The silence in the apartment felt suffocating. Caleb, Marcus, and Eli stood in the dim light of the living room, the weight of their conversation hanging thick in the air. Caleb's heart pounded as he stood between them, his words weighing on the three of them. His faith had transformed him, but now it felt like the greatest test of his life. He had shared his story, his redemption, his newfound peace. He had walked away from the past that once defined him, but could Marcus and Eli do the same? Could they truly embrace the freedom Caleb had found? Or would they cling to the life they knew, filled with the false promises of power, wealth, and control? "Look, Caleb," Marcus said, his voice raw with frustration. "I hear you, man. I do. But you have no idea how hard it is to just leave it all behind. This life, it's everything we know. It's all we've ever had. You think I can just walk away from everything? From the connections, the money, the power? I can't just leave that. It's not that simple." Caleb met Marcus's gaze. "I know it's hard, Marcus. I know it feels impossible. But trust me, when I walked away, it felt like everything was falling apart. But that's when I found God. And the peace I have now, there's nothing else that compares." Eli, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. His voice was quieter than Marcus's, but there was a crack of uncertainty in it. "You're telling me you just let go of everything? Just like that? All the money, the respect, the power, all for some faith? I don't know, man. I don't know if I can do that." Caleb took a deep breath and stepped closer to Eli, trying to reach him on a deeper level. "Eli, I was in the same place. I didn't know how I could walk away from it all either. But the life I was living was eating me alive. I couldn't go on pretending. You can have the same peace I've found. You just have to let go." Marcus turned away, pacing the floor as if trying to work through everything Caleb had said. But Caleb could see the hesitation in his eyes. He knew Marcus was torn between the freedom Caleb was offering and the life he had built. Eli, though, looked as if something was changing within him. Caleb could feel it. There was hope there. But would it be enough? The test of faith. Later that evening, as Caleb sat in his apartment, he found himself wrestling with doubt. The battle was not just between him and his past. It was now between Marcus, Eli, and the choice before them. He had walked away from everything for this moment. But would they do the same? Was his faith enough to change their lives? The knock on the door startled him. Caleb stood up quickly, his heart racing. He opened the door to find Jackson standing there, a sinister smile on his face. "Thought you could get away that easily, huh?" Jackson sneered, stepping inside without waiting for Caleb to invite him in. "You really think I'm going to let you walk away from this life? From everything we built?" Caleb's heart sank. He'd known this moment was coming, but the reality of it hit him hard. Jackson wasn't just a criminal from his past. Jackson was a reminder of everything Caleb had left behind. The pull of that old life, the danger, the chaos, was strong, and Caleb knew he was about to face his biggest test yet. "I'm not going back, Jackson," Caleb said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've made my choice. I found peace. You can't take that from me." Jackson laughed coldly. "You think peace is going to save you? You think faith is going to protect you from the world we live in? You're making a big mistake, Caleb, and I'm going to make sure you regret it." Jackson snapped his fingers, and two of his men stepped forward, blocking the door. The tension in the room was palpable, and Caleb could feel the danger closing in. But in that moment, something changed. Caleb remembered the words of David, the man who had led him to faith in prison, the words that had been burned into his soul. "Faith doesn't mean there won't be challenges, Caleb, but it means that no matter what, God will never leave you. He is your strength." Caleb stepped forward, his chest rising with a deep breath. "I'm not afraid of you, Jackson," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "You can't intimidate me anymore. God is with me, and I'm not going back to that life, not for anything." For a moment, Jackson seemed taken aback. The men behind him shifted uneasily. Caleb could see the confusion in their eyes, and that's when the miracle happened. Jackson lowered his gun. His eyes narrowed, but for the first time, there was doubt in them. "You think you've won, don't you?" Jackson hissed, taking a step back. "You're nothing. But fine, walk away. We'll see how long this peace lasts." With that, Jackson and his men turned and left. Caleb stood there, breathless, his heart racing in his chest. He had stood firm, and for the first time, he felt the true weight of the freedom he had found. The moment of truth. A new beginning. The next day, Caleb stood in front of Marcus and Eli again. This time, the weight of the moment was even heavier. It wasn't just about their past anymore. It was about their future. It was about the choice to leave everything behind and walk into the unknown, trusting in something greater than themselves. "I don't know if I'm ready, Caleb," Marcus said, his voice thick with doubt. "I can't just turn my back on everything, on all the people who depend on me." "But you don't have to live for them anymore," Caleb said, his voice soft but full of conviction. "You can live for yourself, for something greater than this world." Eli stood up, his eyes locked with Caleb's. "I'm ready. I'm tired of living like this. I don't want to be controlled by fear anymore. I want to find what you found." Marcus looked at his brother and then at Caleb. There was a long pause before he spoke. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I'm willing to try." Caleb smiled, a sense of peace flooding over him. "That's all I'm asking for. Take the first step. The rest will come." Together they knelt down, Caleb leading them in prayer. As the words left his mouth, something powerful shifted in the room. It was as if the weight of their old lives was lifted, and a new chapter had begun. The final test. The power of transformation. Months passed. Caleb, Marcus, and Eli each walked a new path, one filled with challenges but also with hope. The world around them didn't change overnight. They still faced temptations, doubts, and moments when the old life called them back. But Caleb's faith and the choice he had made gave them the strength to persevere. One evening, Caleb sat down to write a letter to David, the man who had led him to Christ. In his letter, Caleb reflected on everything he had been through, everything he had learned. He wrote, "David, when I first came to prison, I didn't know how I could ever change. I thought my past would always define me, but with God's grace, I've found freedom. And now I get to share that freedom with my brothers. Marcus and Eli are no longer the men they used to be, and neither am I. We've been redeemed, and I thank God every day for showing me the way." The lessons learned. As Caleb finished the letter, he looked out the window at the sunset. His journey had been long and difficult, filled with moments of doubt and fear. But in the end, he knew the most important lesson. Faith in God is the true freedom that leads to transformation. Through Caleb's story, there are several key lessons that can be drawn. Redemption is always possible. No matter how deep the darkness, no matter how far one has fallen, God's grace is greater. Caleb's story is a testament to the power of God's forgiveness and how it can completely transform someone's life. The temptation of the past never truly leaves. No matter how far you've come, the past will always call you back. Whether it's the lure of old habits, people, or lifestyles, the pull to return to the familiar can be strong. But with faith, it is possible to resist. Freedom comes from letting go. True freedom comes when we let go of our past, our mistakes, our guilt, our desires, and choose to follow a new path. Caleb's decision to walk away from his old life wasn't easy, but it was the only way to find true peace. Faith is not a one-time decision. It's a daily choice. Just because Caleb had made his decision to follow God didn't mean the journey was over. Every day was a new challenge, but the choice to trust in God's strength and His plan for your life is a daily act of faith. You don't have to do it alone. Caleb couldn't change alone. He had to rely on his faith and the support of others, especially Marcus and Eli. In the same way, we need others to walk with us on the journey of faith. We're never meant to face life's challenges alone. The end.